You know, a child will always run to their dad, not because he understands everything, not because he can fix everything, simply because that's where the child knows they belong. When they're happy, they run to him. When they're afraid, they run to him. Even when they've done something wrong, deep down, they still know the only place they truly want to come back to is where their father is. And that isn't just true for children. Think about a flock of sheep. They don't need to be reminded that they need a shepherd. They know. It's instinctive. Without a shepherd, they wander. Without that familiar voice, they grow restless. They don't know where to go anymore. And whether we say it out loud or not, there is something deep within every one of us, a quiet longing to be near the one who made us. Not because we fully understand him, but because we were made to belong to him. And yet, there are moments along the way when something changes. Not because that longing disappears, and not because God has changed, but somehow something has come in between. And when you read Isaiah 59, you don't read it like a distant passage anymore. You read it, and you recognize it. Scripture doesn't say that people have stopped needing God. It doesn't say that God has walked away, but it points to something else. Something quiet, something hard to name, but strong enough to stand in between. And once it's there, everything is still there, but it no longer reaches. Part 1, it was never God who moved, and this is where Isaiah says something that most people don't expect. He doesn't begin by talking about how far people have drifted. He begins by saying this: the Lord's hand is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear. In other words, nothing has changed on God's side. He hasn't stepped back. He hasn't grown distant. He hasn't stopped listening. And if you let that settle for a moment, it changes the question completely. Because most of us, when something feels off in our walk with God, we assume it must be him. Maybe he's quiet. Maybe he's distant. Maybe he's just not responding like before. But Isaiah doesn't leave room for that. He brings you to a place where you have to face something deeper. If God is still reaching and God is still hearing, then the distance we feel is not coming from him. And that's not an easy thing to sit with, because it's always easier to believe that something outside of us has shifted than to consider that something within us might be blocking what was once clear. It's like standing under the sun, and suddenly everything feels dim, not because the sun has gone anywhere. It's still there, still shining, but a cloud has moved in between. But you're still in the same place. The sun hasn't changed, but what reaches you is no longer the same. And that's the part we often misunderstand. We look at the dimness and assume the source has changed, when in reality, something has simply come in between. And Isaiah is leading us right into that moment, not to accuse, not to shame, but to show us something we cannot see unless we're willing to look honestly. Because until we see what stands in between, we will keep reaching for God and wonder why it still feels like we're not quite touching him. Part 2, the things that seem small until they're not. Let me put it this way. The rust never starts as a problem. It begins as something so small you barely notice it. A thin line, a faint spot, easy to ignore. You don't panic when you see it. You don't think, this will ruin everything, but you leave it there. And over time, it spreads, quietly, consistently, until one day the thing that once felt solid isn't anymore. And that's the part most people miss. And because when we think about sin, we tend to think about the obvious things, the big moments, the visible failures, the things no one can deny. But when you listen closely to what Isaiah 59 is actually describing, it's not dramatic. Your lips have spoken falsely. Your tongue mutters wicked things. It sounds ordinary, the way we speak, the way we treat people, the thoughts we allow to stay. Not loud rebellion, just patterns, a little bitterness that we never really deal with, a habit we know isn't right, but we let it stay, a way of thinking that slowly shifts, but we stop questioning it. Nothing dramatic, but not nothing, because over time, those small things don't remain small. They settle in, they become familiar, and once something becomes familiar, we stop seeing it clearly. That's how distance begins, not with a moment that shocks you, but with things you slowly learn to live with. And the danger is, they don't feel like they're separating you from God. They just sit there, quiet, but present. And little by little, they begin to stand in between. Part 3. When you still see, but not the same way. There's a line in Isaiah 59 that's easy to pass by, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. They grope along the wall like the blind. At midday they stumble as if it were twilight. That's not someone far from God and aware of it. That's someone who is still moving, still living, still thinking they can see, but something isn't clear anymore. And the hardest part is, nothing in your life looks obviously broken. You're still there, still believing, still doing what you've always done. But inside, something has shifted. Not all at once. Not enough to alarm you. Just enough that what once felt wrong doesn't feel the same anymore. You still see it. You just don't look at it the way you used to. You notice it, but you move past it quicker. You feel it, but not as deeply. And after a while, you stop asking questions you once couldn't ignore. That's what Isaiah is describing. Not darkness that overwhelms you, but a dimness you learn to live with. They look for light, but all is darkness. For brightness, but they walk in deep shadows. And the danger isn't that you've lost God. It's that you've adjusted to something that quietly keeps you from seeing him clearly. And once that happens, distance doesn't feel like distance anymore. It just feels normal. Part 4. When everything still works, but truth is gone. There's a shift in Isaiah 59 that's hard to ignore once you see it. It's no longer just about an individual. It becomes a whole environment. Justice is turned back, and righteousness stands far away. Truth has stumbled in the streets, and honesty cannot enter. That's not chaos. That's something far more subtle. Everything is still functioning. People still go to work, still build careers, still raise families. But something essential is no longer there. Truth is no longer at the center. And you can see it if you're honest. You see it in the way people speak, how words are used, but don't always mean anything anymore. A promise is made and broken, and everyone just moves on. You see it in how quickly something false spreads, and how little it matters whether it's true or not. You see it in conversations, where people don't really listen, they just wait for their turn to speak. You see it in how easily we justify things now, things that not long ago we would have stopped and questioned. And no one stands up and says this is wrong, not because people don't know, but because it's easier to go along with it. That's the world Isaiah is describing. Not a world that has loudly rejected God, but a world that has quietly learned to live without truth. And when truth is no longer held in place, everything else begins to shift. Slowly, silently, until what used to feel wrong no longer feels that way, and what used to be clear becomes uncertain. And here's the part we don't always see. It doesn't stay outside of you. It gets in. You begin to speak the same way, think the same way, adjust in ways you don't even notice anymore. And before long, you're not just living in that environment. You've become part of it. And that's when the distance grows. Because the thing standing in between is no longer just around you, it's within you. Part 5. When you call and nothing seems to break through, you can pray sincerely and still not be fully honest with God. And this is where Isaiah 59 becomes very direct. It doesn't describe people who have stopped praying. It describes people who are still calling out, still asking, still waiting for something to change. But what they experience is not what they expect. Justice is nowhere to be found. And when they hope for light, there is darkness. They are reaching, but nothing seems to break through. And this is where many people begin to misunderstand what's happening. Because when prayer feels like it's not reaching, we assume God must not be listening. But Isaiah never says that. In fact, earlier he already made it clear. God still hears. God is still able. So the problem is not silence on God's side. It's something else. Something that doesn't always stop us from praying, but quietly changes how we come to him. We still speak, but we don't always come honestly. We still ask, but we hold on to things we don't want to face. We still seek God, but not with a heart that is fully open. And over time, prayer can become something we do without letting it touch the parts of us that actually need to be seen. That's why Isaiah describes people who are searching for justice, for light, for something real, but not finding it. Not because God is absent, but because something is still being held back. And here's the question that sits underneath all of this. Not why isn't God responding, but is there something I'm not willing to bring into the light? Because prayer was never meant to be words sent upward. It was meant to be a life brought into the open. And here's the part we need to hold on to. This is not about God turning away from you. It's about God waiting for you to come to him without holding anything back. Because the moment that changes, the distance you feel doesn't stay the same. Part 6. The moment you stop explaining and start telling the truth. There's a moment in Isaiah 59 where everything changes. Up to this point, it's been description, what's happening, what's missing, what's broken. But then the tone shifts. It becomes personal. Our sins testify against us, and we know our iniquities, not someone else's, not something far away, ours. And that's the moment most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Because as long as something stays vague, you can keep explaining it. You can call it stress. You can call it personality. You can call it circumstances. But the moment you name it, you lose the ability to hide from it. And that's exactly what happens here. There's no more distance in the language. No more general ideas. Just a quiet, undeniable clarity. We know. Not because someone told us. Not because we were forced. But because deep down, we've always known. We know the words we said that we shouldn't have said. We know the things we allowed that we didn't want to face. We know the patterns we stopped questioning a long time ago. And for a long time we learned to live around them. We adjust. We justify. We move on. But something in us never fully agrees with it. That's why Isaiah says, our sins testify against us. Not in a loud way. Not in a condemning voice, but in a way that stays. Quiet, persistent, always there. And here's the turning point. Nothing begins to change until we stop explaining and start telling the truth. Not a polished version, not a careful version, just the truth. Because the distance you've been feeling is not removed by trying harder. It's removed the moment you stop hiding. And this is where everything shifts. Not because you finally fix yourself, but because you finally stop pretending. And when that happens, you're no longer standing at a distance, trying to reach God. You're standing in the light, with nothing left to hide. Part 7. When God steps in, before you can fix it. And just when you finally stop explaining and start telling the truth, you begin to realize something else. You can see it now. You can name it. You're no longer hiding from it, but you still can't undo it. You can't go back and take back the words. You can't erase the patterns overnight. You can't make your heart feel the way it used to feel. And that's the place most people don't know what to do with, because now it's clear that it's not fixed. And this is exactly where Isaiah 59 turns in a way no one expects. It says that God looked, and he saw that there was no one stepping in. No one able to set things right. And it says, he was troubled by that, not indifferent, not distant. He saw it clearly, the distance, the brokenness, the truth you've just begun to face. And instead of waiting for someone to fix it, he moved, so his own arm brought salvation. That's not a small statement. It means the restoration of what was broken does not begin with you trying harder. It begins with God stepping into what you cannot repair. Because there are things in life you can improve, and then there are things you cannot fix. Not by effort, not by time, not even by intention. And this is one of them. You can bring it into the light, but you cannot restore it back to what it was. Only God can do that. And Isaiah doesn't present that as a distant hope. He presents it as something God has already chosen to do. Not because you earned it. Not because you figured everything out, but because he saw, and he did not leave it there. And this changes the way you understand everything that came before. The distance you felt was never something you were meant to solve on your own. It was something meant to bring you to the point where you would finally stop trying to fix it and allow God to step in. Because the moment he does, what stood in between doesn't have the final word anymore. Part 8. What hasn't moved, even when you did. And this is what we often miss after everything we've just seen. We think the story ends with what went wrong or with what needs to be fixed. But Isaiah 59 doesn't end there. It ends with something much quieter, but much stronger. A promise, not built on how well you hold on to God, but on how firmly he holds on to you. My spirit will not depart from you. My words will not leave you. That's not said to people who got everything right. That's said in the middle of everything we've just walked through, after the distance, after the confusion, after the truth has finally come into the light. And if you're not careful, you'll miss how steady that is, because everything in us tends to measure closeness by what we feel. If we feel near, we think we are. If we feel far, we assume something is gone. But what you feel is distance, is not the same as being abandoned. There are seasons in life where the surface feels dry, where prayer feels quiet, where things don't move the way they used to. But that doesn't mean there is no life. Sometimes it just means you're no longer living on the surface, like water that runs deep underground. You don't see it, you don't hear it, but it hasn't disappeared. It's still there, still moving, still sustaining everything you don't even realize depends on it. And in the same way, there are things God has established in your life that do not shift every time your feelings do. His Spirit, His Word, His covenant. They remain, even when you struggle, even when you drift, even when you don't feel close at all. And this is where something begins to change. Not because everything is suddenly fixed, but because you begin to realize maybe the distance you've been feeling is not the whole story. Maybe there is something still holding you, even now. It's something that hasn't let go. And if that's true, then you're not starting over. You're coming back to something that was still there all along. Conclusion: if you've walked with me this far, then maybe you're not looking for another explanation. Maybe you're just quiet now, because something in you has already recognized it. Not everything, but enough. And that's where I want to leave you. Not with a summary, but with a moment. A moment where you don't try to fix anything. You don't try to say the right words. You just stop and become honest. Because if Isaiah 59 shows us anything, it's that distance is not always what we think it is. It's not always rebellion. It's not always walking away. Sometimes it's just something small that stayed too long, grew too familiar, and quietly stood in between. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a long time, you're seeing it. Not clearly, not perfectly, but honestly. And that's enough, because God has never asked you to come back to Him with everything fixed. He has always asked you to come back with nothing hidden. So wherever you are right now, whether you feel close or far or somewhere in between, don't try to rebuild everything at once, but just take one step. Not toward a perfect version of yourself, but toward truth. Say what you haven't said. Bring what you've kept back. Not because God doesn't already know, but because you're finally ready to stand before Him without holding anything back. And you may not feel something dramatic. You may not feel anything at all at first. But something will be different. Not outside, but in the way you stand before Him. And sometimes that's where closeness begins again. Not in emotion, not in effort, but in honesty. And if you can stand there, even for a moment, then maybe you'll begin to see you were never as far as you thought.